Welcome to AskPrebuilt, the series where I answer your questions about 7 Days to Die, other games, and just random things. If you want your question featured in a future video, be sure to leave a comment below with the phrase AskPrebuilt in it so that I can find it in future. Anyway, let's get on to the first question. Tiago Conceso wants to know if I can explain how zombies spawn in the Wasteland. In the nighttime, it becomes a little horde night when zombies see you, like they don't stop coming. So in general, the Wasteland has more dangerous spawns first of all. You're going to see more ferals and feral wights just walking around during the day. And if you're walking around in a downtown area of the Wasteland, you'll see some pretty scary zombies even on day one, including feral wights. So first of all, the Wasteland has massively more dangerous zombies, which is an important thing to note. But as for why it feels like a little horde night when zombies see you at night in the Wasteland, basically what happens is when you kill one zombie in the Wasteland, a new one is spawned somewhere else almost instantly, and of course zombies only spawn within a limited range of you. So if you get seen by a zombie and you make any noise killing it, then a few other zombies are going to hear you and come after you, and as you continue to make the noise and kill more zombies, they're immediately replaced in the area you're already in, so they'll be able to hear you when you make more noise to kill them. The way to get around this is if you just sit still and quiet on a roof, out of their vision for a while, they will just forget about you. They're not like Blood Moon zombies where they will just endlessly chase you. You can just sneak and wait them out, then you can sneak away from them or wait until morning. Objective X wants to know, do trader quests have cross progression? Like if there are two of the same trader in a world handing out the same tier of jobs, could I hypothetically do 4 at one and 3 at the other and get the tier completion reward like that from whichever one I did the final job for? Yes, you can do that, but it is only between copies of the same trader. So for example, 2 gens will both be tier 3 if you get one of them to tier 3, and you can get to tier 4 by doing quests either of them in any combination, as long as it is the same character. The character can be in any location. Ultralux wants to know, if you could choose any location for a POI in Alpha 21, what would you choose? When it comes to cool things that they could add right now, and this is kind of weird, but it is something that you will immediately notice is missing, a bus station. That is probably the most logical POI that should exist that doesn't. Because we have buses, we have bus stops, and we have all of the assets for a full bus station. They just haven't made the place where the buses go to sleep or whatever buses do there. I don't know, I'm not a bus scientist. A simple tier 3 or tier 4 POI that's quite wide with a couple of floors would be fine. Chop the Sui wants to know, with spears getting a power attack versus throwing, what would you think of Javelins being a ranged spear tree option if they weren't insanely material heavy to make and did pretty good damage? Also, no more vanishing spears, lol. If TFP could make it without breaking the game entirely, sure. I've been a long time supporter of javelin and pike weapons. I remember saying this back in a live stream like a year ago. You could have spears, in quotation marks, be an umbrella term, and then you have the stone spear as your base spear weapon, which just works as spears would in Alpha 21. And then it splits off into 2 separate trees, kind of like how pistols do, and on one tree you've got the iron pike and the steel pike, and on the other tree you have the iron javelin and the steel javelin, with pikes being essentially what spears are going to be in Alpha 21 anyway, and javelins being what spears currently are, with the added boost of making them stackable. Maybe you can hold 5 of them and throw multiple into zombies in rapid succession. And it's not like stackable throwing weapons aren't already in the game. We have grenades, so there's no reason they couldn't do that, but I doubt they'll bother. And I can honestly live without them, so that's fair. Jim Dobb wants to know, what do you think of high-level quest chains that connect traders to each other so you don't need to waste time traveling between traders to access their resources? I'm not the biggest fan of that idea, because one of the few limitations of traders is that they don't share inventories. If you could eventually access an entire map's worth of traders by just going to the one you live next to, that would be far too powerful and far too convenient. I do like the idea of high-level quest chains that in some way make other things better. Like in Alpha 21 we're going to be losing the secret stash, but I wouldn't mind if there was like a high level quest chain that took you a long time to reach that gave you a new version of the secret stash. That sounds more interesting than just making traders extremely overpowered and also making it so that it's related to perks, because everything's related to perks. It would be a bit more interesting if what we did in the world did something. Octavius Fig Newton asks, I've been playing since Alpha 13, but I still struggle with finding, organizing, and installing mods. How do you deal with the chore of managing mods? PS, love the series and your snark about TFP. The best way to handle your mods if you don't like doing it manually with the mods folder is just using the 7 Days to Die mod launcher, which is linked in the description. You basically just click download and it'll do most of the work for you. Jefferson wants to know how I feel about the Ark Survival Evolved situation. For those that don't know, Wildcard, the developers of Ark Survival Evolved, are releasing Ark Survival Ascended, which is an update to the next generation version of the original game, updated to Unreal Engine 5, that you'll have to purchase separately from the original game. I do think it's bad that they're shutting down the old servers, but overall it's not that bad of a thing at all. It sucks for those who obviously can't afford the new version, or those who are just too stubborn to update, but custom servers will always exist in the old version, as well as single player and hosting your own games. And for those who do get the updated game, it will really be a breath of fresh air, assuming it actually works and isn't a buggy mess that takes 5 years to fix. I can understand if hardcore players of Ark are annoyed that they're not going to be seeing Ark 2 as soon as they could, because obviously Wildcard has dedicated some amount of resources to this port, so I can get why people would be annoyed with that. I think a better way to look at this is future-proofing their franchise. Ark 2 is going to be a big risk for Ark. It's apparently going to be a very different game. And if a lot of people get Ark 2 and they don't like it, then they're gonna be going back to the regular Ark Survival Evolved game, which is a very old game at this point because it's been in development on that same engine and on that same framework for like a decade now. And I understand why they can't release Ark Survival Ascended after Ark 2, because realistically, a large amount of the player base is gonna go straight to Ark 2 and not want Ark Survival Ascended. So what you get from Ark Survival Ascended, with it coming out before Ark 2, is you get a version of Ark Survival Evolved that players who don't like Ark 2 can play for another 10 years, with it still being relatively workable on current systems and being updated for them. They can stay on the old version of Ark with an updated engine that makes it a lot more bearable, hopefully, and Wildcard doesn't have to re-release their old game in the middle of the cycle of Ark 2, which would hurt one of them. Either people don't like Ark 2 enough to stay with it, or people aren't interested enough in Ark Survival Ascended to go to it. So to release it before Ark 2 does make the most sense. But of course, it does suck for the people who just were fine playing regular Ark Survival Evolved, or the people who are excited for Ark 2. But for the people who end up not liking Ark 2, I think Ark Survival Ascended, in like 5 years when people forget this controversy, is going to be a good thing for Ark. And Raven wants to know what makes a survival game enjoyable for you instead of just over/understimming, e.g. Valheim and Medieval Dynasty compared to Terraria or Raft. So for those who don't know, I've played Terraria and Raft with Raven and I did not enjoy those games. Terraria was just too confusing and there was so much content, I just didn't know what to do and had no sentiment attached to the game to keep banging my head against the wall. I do want to play it again in future though, just not sure when. Raft I hated because it was just a very annoying game to play. The game was annoying to play, which is not a really good start for your game, and of course that's completely subjective, but it's why I didn't like it. As for why I like Valheim and Medieval Dynasty, I think they're very good at pacing and avoiding that early game overwhelm. They hide a lot from you early on, and really only let you do a couple of things, and gradually you start to discover more of the world and it gets more complicated at a pretty satisfying speed. I can't say where 7 Days to Die fits into this because it's vastly different, but it does benefit from the inherent cultural understanding of like modern zombie apocalypse. We've all seen zombie movies and we get the idea. We go into buildings, we find supplies, we live, woohoo. However, I don't know how to operate in the nonsensical worlds of Valheim, Terraria and Raft. But Valheim does a good job of keeping it so simple you understand it initially, and then it gets onto the really weird like swamps filled with zombies and goblins and giant furry lizards and giant bugs. You know, it's a good progression there. Terraria is a 2D world with no real limitations and no inherently understood world. It kind of just throws you into a completely alien experience with no paddle. So I guess the answer to the question, what makes a survival game enjoyable to me, instead of overwhelming or boring, lies entirely in how the game is paced and how it reveals itself to you. If it seems like it's nothing but floating around on a raft as you die to weird things that you don't understand, it's boring, slow and dissatisfying. I have a life, I have a job, I have problems. If I'm playing a game, it's because I want to enjoy it. I'm not going to waste time trying to overcome the learning curve before I know I like the basics of the game. Of course, that's all just my opinion on what makes a game good. Some people like the Dark Souls strategy of just dying 100 times and then feeling like a god when you eventually master it. But personally, I'm not going to dedicate 10 hours of my valuable time to just pure agony just to find out that when I'm actually able to play the game, that playing the game isn't all that enjoyable. So, I don't want a game with no challenge, but I'm not just going to play a game for the sake of playing it because I don't owe the game my time, so it needs to be paced well. Anyway, if you want your question answered in a future video, be sure to put AskPrebuilt in the question so that I can find it in future. Thank you to my channel members and patrons for making this video possible, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.